coming. I think we're really privileged today to have Steve. Steve's going to introduce himself from CHIRP, but oops, treasurer. Yeah, it's always a treasurer. And I think the best thing to do is for me to shut up and let Steve introduce himself. So, what is it, John?
So these lights are quite light.
Do you want them off? Who wants them off?
No,
Good,
please.
Steve's on the case.
Don't go to sleep.
Does that look better?
Yeah, that's good.
It's okay for the camera.
Yeah.
Light section.
All right.
That looks better on
Yes, half your arm.
Evening all. Steve Ford, as introduced. Could just first say it's great to come out and see people. I've been doing this role now for just come up to 3 years. But I started in April 2020, just as COVID hit. So I've spent 2 years doing my role and trying to get messages out and talk to people and get feedback and all that sort of stuff from a desk and a Zoom and whatever, and it's pretty soul destroying. So I'm genuinely very happy to come out and start my campaign of getting the message out what CHIRP is to a group of people. You're a bit of a guinea pig team, dare I say it, because I haven't been out and about very much with this presentation, so it's sort of trial run. We'll see how it goes. I don't know, it's not going to be hours and hours, but I don't know exactly how long it's going to be, but I shall try and tailor it accordingly. And just hopefully we'll enjoy the session. I'm not going to sit and preach, or stand and preach, should I say. You're all very experienced folk, but I will try and just raise a few issues, a few thoughts about what's going on with CHIRP reporting and things we've seen in the past few months at CHIRP. With a GA flavour, unashamedly, I don't get a lot of gliding reports through CHIRP, which is interesting, isn't it? And we'll come into that maybe a bit later on at the end of the debate. More of a GA flavour, but they transfer across to what you do as well. So that's what I'm trying to achieve today. I'm just going to put this up, not for them to sort of stand around and strut about saying what a fantastic ace of base I am, just that that's my aviation background. So I'm a military aviator when it comes down to it overall. 40 odd years of flying whatever, fast jets and things. So not a commercial pilot. I put that up when I do this to commercial audiences because we also deal with commercial aviation, and I'm very clear that I'm not a commercial aviator. I don't understand. Well, I do understand, but I don't have the deep knowledge of their world. Equally GA. So I have a PPL. Probably interested most in the bottom right hand corner there. So I have done a bit of gliding. Sadly, that came to a grinding halt about 5 years ago. Life got in the way, COVID got in the way. I was doing my gliding at Holton, and I was basically working up towards bronze, as was in those days. So I know a bit about your world, probably enough to say stupid things. So do correct me when I get it wrong, if I get it wrong. So a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of understanding, but you obviously are the experts more than I am in terms of the gliding world. What's CHIRP about? So as the name suggests, Confidential Human Factors Incident Reporting Programme. The idea being that we are a conduit for reporting safety issues that either wouldn't ordinarily get reported, either don't raise themselves to the threshold of an incident or an accident or whatever. We're also there to receive information, intelligence. Intelligence, I don't. It sounds a very clandestine word, doesn't it? But intelligence about what's going on in the aviation world, and passing that up to the powers that be. Powers that be in our world being Civil Aviation Authority, in the airline world, the airlines themselves. So that's where CHIRP is very much focused, but we also have the GA responsibility as well. And absolutely understanding, in a club environment, you will have a safety officer, I'm sure, who will receive reports and deal with them, and you'll probably report those through the BGA, I don't know, or if it's an important or a serious incident or an accident, heaven forbid, then there'll be an MOR that goes to the CAA. That's all well and good, and we operate in parallel with that, but we're after the more sort of the finer, lower level detail to try and put two and two together and help people report incidents that they may not have reported otherwise. So speaking truth under power and acting as a bit of a safety valve. Now, speaking truth under power doesn't always work that brilliantly. If we do
Just thought you might want to know, sales aren't up, they're down.
So speaking truth under power has various success rate. Genuinely, the CIA, who I deal a lot with, are very receptive to our work, and they understand what we're trying to achieve, and so it generally works pretty well. But sometimes, the seeds can fall on the stony ground. Why are we doing what we do? I won't go into this in depth, but our mandate to do confidential reporting lies in the ICAO levels, I think called Annex 19, those safety officers will know what that is. EU regulations talk about the need for states to have a confidential reporting process, and UK now has adopted all that, so a need for that confidential reporting process. But the most important piece is at the bottom. So within the CIA aviation regulatory network document set, there's a thing called a state safety plan, and that recognises CHIRP as being the confidential reporting process. So that's why we exist, that's why we do what we do, and that's where we get our mandate for me coming out and doing this sort of thing and actually existing in any sort of real form. How does that work in terms of the hierarchy of reporting and that sort of thing? I've sort of touched on a little bit to start with the mandated reporting processes that exist, which you may not be familiar with. I mean, I wouldn't criticise if you're not being familiar with it, because it's quite obscure. Some of the the mandatory reporting, quite difficult to do. It's not an easy process, but a necessary process. So that exists, and that basically looks at the top of the pyramid there. So that, by the way, that pyramid is called Heinrich's pyramid. It's all a bit theoretical. Don't get hung up on the numbers, but it talks about for every fatal accident there being 10 or so serious incidents, 30 or so other less serious incidents, and then below that a whole bunch of things that go on which may not be raised to the level of a reportable incident. So it's a theoretical sort of look at the whole world. I mean, I don't know what the veracity of the whole thing is, but it's there. Top of the pyramid, so that is the CIA and the AIB. You'll refer to the AIB. They look at accidents and serious incidents, and they do their reports. And if you're interested, there's a website you can download and look at reports. You'll probably operate or report through, if you are affiliated to the BGA, I'm assuming you are, through them, and you'll probably report through the BGA, which will then go through into the CIA MOR. MOR, mandatory occurrence report. Sounds a bit scary, the mandatory bit, and they're trying to move away from that, because it all sounds a bit too formalised, if you like. Occurrence reporting is what they're after. Now, they get logged, but they may not get analysed or reviewed. The CIA gets something like 30,000 MORs a year. There's a fair amount of stuff coming into them, and so they don't have the staff or the resources to look at every one. They'll review them, a quick, I wouldn't say cursory is probably the wrong word. They'll review the MOR, it'll get classified, and then the serious stuff will then get looked at by somebody in the appropriate unit. The other less serious stuff will then just get logged in the system, and then it won't get detailed analysis. So the CIA do that. They also do voluntary reporting, which is the other side of the MOR process. There's mandatory reporting and there's voluntary reporting, MOR and VOR. VOR being a report you can just do yourself without having to go through a process with a club or a company or whatever. And whistleblowing. So that's all very interesting. We sort of talk about the top of the pyramid, that sort of reporting process being sort of shutting the stable door after the horse is bolted. Something has happened, an accident has happened, an incident's happened, and then they're going to review it and try to tease out the important stuff. And we, in the safety world, talk about that being a lagging indicator. It's all too late. You don't want it to happen again, so the lessons to be learned, but the accident happened. So a bit too late to save or stop the effect that occurred to start with. Where are we at CHIRP? So CHIRP is very much at the bottom end of the pyramid. So we're after those normal operations, those little things. So that's just the sort of the aviation life. How many times have you done something or something's happened and you've done something, you resolved the issue, so you didn't crash, you didn't have an incident or whatever, but there's an important lesson there that you did something that others might learn from. So where do we log that? How do we advertise all that? Well, we don't do that very well, do we? So that's where CHIRP is. That's what CHIRP is after, if we can. All those little things that happened where, well, if you hadn't intervened or whatever circumstance might have happened, then it would have maybe evolved into an incident or an accident. So that's a big part of our world, is the bottom end, normal operations, those little unsafe things that happen, things you forgot to do, little procedural things or whatever, or things you did do that resolve the issue. And so what we call that in the safety world, called leading indicators, precursor lessons. So that's where we are finding out things, hopefully, before we've had a major problem. So we can then publicise them and say, hey, this thing happened, you may want to think about this next time we go flying. And that's very much where CHIRP wants to be, in that sort of space. We're not up at the top bit, we're down in this bottom bit. So that kind of explains where we are as CHIRP. In terms of our mandate and role, we all have to have a mission, don't we? I'm not a great fan of missions, but we've got one, as all organisations do. What I am more focused on is what we're trying to achieve now, the why of the whole thing. So the reason we're doing what we're doing, other than the mandate I showed you before from ICAO and regulations and the CAA, is we are trying to change or build awareness of safety issues, really. Now, you'll probably sit there and go, well, we've got plenty of safety issues, we talk about them in the club, and we publicise them or whatever. That's good. That's good. Please keep on doing that. But it's very insular. Nobody else outside the club is going to know that. So how are we going to get that message out? So that's what we're trying to achieve. Publicity, the wider world, learning the lessons, first, the why. It's better leadership awareness and attitude towards safety issues. Yes, second bullet, improving safety culture. So changing behaviours. If you just go away with one thought from tonight, then I'll have been successful. One thing you do differently maybe, or think differently, then that'll be great. It's all about that changing the way we think about things and incorporating safety into everything we do. Now I think as glider pilots, I'm a bit of a glider pilot, I think we're pretty safety conscious in some respects because of the fact that it is what it is. There's no, you're using free air, you don't have power or whatever, so we tend to think about that, and that's one of the reasons why I actually went to gliding when I stopped flying the fast jets, because you have to think. So you're not just tooling around, oh, this is a bit difficult, I'll just fire up the motor and off we go. You've got to think about it. So you're pretty clear on safety, or pretty aware of safety. So not such an issue, but there are still behaviours to change, practices. Are procedures as safe as they can be? Are we doing things that we've always done it that way? Or why have we done that? Do we ever think about that as a club? And then the last one, of course, we want people to do things. So when somebody reports to us and there's an issue, then we want whoever reported or the organisation they came from to change something if there was something to change. And that's the other point, the third why of what we're doing, what we do. So that's the three. That's what I'm here to sort of try and give you some thoughts on. In terms of CHIRP itself, well, we go back quite a long way. I mean, I've only been in the organisation as a formal staff, I say for nearly 3 years, but we go back to 1982 when it was first kicked off, actually by the military that kicked it off, Institute of Aviation Medicine, and then it sort of evolved and whatever. So we're in our current form a charitable. We're a charity, 1996 and onwards from there. Interesting, but probably not vital. What are we focusing on? So, as the name suggests, the clue's in the name, isn't it? Human factors. So that's where we are interested in. Now, of course, we take other stuff as well, but we're primarily trying to work out what the human factors involved in that reporting or that incident, should I say, or close incident. So that, again, we can learn and maybe advise as well. Yes, we're in that non-judgmental space, non-punitive. We use it's actually called Just Culture. Are you aware of Just Culture? Is that permeated down? Basically, it's the sort of concept where if somebody does something, they are able to put their hand up and say, I did this thing, without being penalised or ostracised, dare I say. So it's an ability and an atmosphere where you can go, yeah, this thing happened. How can we learn from this event? So that's Just Culture, and that's what we're all about. Funding. Now I'm going to say this. So having mentioned all that CAA stuff, as it turns out, we are funded solely by the CAA. So I would say that, but I would also say that we are also completely autonomous. So they give us a bunch of money every year and go, hey Steve, here's some money, go off and do good stuff. And it literally is that sort of, well, it's a bit more than that. I have to justify and I have to beg a bit for the money. But by saying that we are totally funded by the CAA, we are, but we are totally independent, and there is nobody looking over my shoulder, looking at what we do, saying, oh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? They have no access to our systems. We have a completely independent database, completely independent system, and nobody from the CAA can even look into our system. So it is totally independent. You can be guaranteed of that, but it's absolutely fair to say that we are funded solely by the CAA to do their work for them. And they do that because they understand that there needs to be some separation between the regulator and the reporting system to encourage people to report. So that's why we're totally independent. The other thing which is important to note is we have no authority to do anything. So unlike the AIB, if you have an accident, you are required, it's a bit like the police, you are required to be interviewed by them, go and be interviewed and whatever, and give a statement and witness statements and all that sort of stuff. We have none of that, so we are a charity. We can say whatever we like. If people choose to, they can totally ignore what we say, but they don't, generally, he says it. So the idea being that we are a bit of the conscience of the aviation world. We rely on the regulator or the industry or stakeholders or whatever to do the right thing. That generally works out pretty well. But we have no authority to say, and you will do this. Now I can go and tap on the door of my big brother CAA and say, well, we really think that West Midlands or whatever, Midland Gliding Club, are being a bit cavalier about this sort of thing. You might want to go and have a chat with them or something, I don't know, whatever, make it up yourself. So I could do that, but we don't tend to do that. But there is a sort of final resort. If an airline or whatever isn't responding, then I can go to my big brother and say, okay, you kind of need to look at them. And the other thing I would say as well, the last bullet there, panel of peers. So it's not what Chairman Steve says about whatever you report. We have these things called advisory boards, and they are a group of peers who come and sit every 3 months for a certain sector of the aviation world, and they review the report. Hey, well, here's what we think in our wealth of experience, a bit like you sitting here today. They look at a report and go, well, here's what we think was going on here. Here are the human factors, stuff we think you should be getting involved in. And they give me the wealth of their wisdom. So it isn't just me. We have one of those panels for air transport, for GA, for drones, and also for cabin crew. So 4 of those, if that's the next slide actually. Each of those sits, I say, on a 3-monthly basis, and they're staggered, so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that there's 1 a month happening. So I'm pretty busy doing that. My title is Director of Aviation, pretty grand, but I'm pretty much director of myself. That's not quite true because I have a small team underneath me. What I would say is we're all part-time, so the resource is spread pretty thinly. I have a cabin crew program manager who's also a bit of our aviation admin worker who sits below me. I have an engineering program manager, a drone program manager, and a ground handling program manager. The latter 3 do 1 day a week, so you can see we're not a huge resource. So we do. It's not a quick process whenever you report to us. If you're after a resolution tomorrow, then CHIRP isn't the right place for you. You need to go to somebody who can deal with that. But we will deal with stuff on a longer term basis. Reports come into us, and I'll mention all that in a minute when I get to the next piece of slide. Who's on the boards? I'll just let this build. We have quite a few of the organisations. You'll recognise some of those, I'm sure. Various guys come and sit on our boards and the various boards that we have going on there. And they do provide us with a serious amount of credibility and a serious amount of information. You'll see NATS and the CAA come in as advisory capacity just to give us the full regulatory impact. But the key members of the team are these ones down here: independent pilots, air traffic control officers and engineering members. They give us their time for free, altruistically. I don't pay them, I've got no money to pay them. All they get is a free lunch. So once every 3 months they come to the venue, which we move around the southern UK mostly, I have to say, and give me the benefit of their knowledge, purely because they want to give something back to aviation. So that is a very powerful thing for us, people doing that, because they recognise they've got a good amount of their careers sometimes out of aviation, and they want to give something back to the rest of the community. So you report to us, on the right hand side there. Now clearly I will know exactly who's reporting. It's an email process, your name, your details, your email, and the first thing we do is have a discussion. So thanks so much for your report. Here's what I think what I get out of the report. You've given me the text or whatever. Is that correct? What do you want me to do about it? What is your desired result? And who can I talk to? So in the commercial world, quite sensitive. Somebody will report to me and say, well, here's the issue. You can't talk to the company because they'll immediately know who I am and I'll get the sack. So we're quite constrained by that sometimes. So, well, what do you want us to do then? Well, generically, we can go to the CAA and say, can you engage with the company on a generic basis, not on a specific incident basis? And they'll do that for us. They'll say, okay, yeah, that's a fair cop. We'll get our flight ops inspected just to go along and do an ad hoc visit. And you go, yeah, well, how's your fatigue management system working, chaps, or whatever, and do it on that basis rather than it being, CHIRP said this, there's a report saying this, and whatever. So that can work quite well as well. So, but we know who it is. What we don't do is pass that on. So for industry, the regulators, or even the advisory boards don't know who has made that report, and we just identify the information to the advisory boards as well, because it could be in the commercial world that somebody who's made a report may well be from the same company as one of the advisory board members, and so they might know that person, and there could be interactions between that sort of confidentiality between those two. So we don't do that either. So the advisory board just gets the plain disidentified facts. We do the whole thing, we talk to all the people, whatever, come to a conclusion, and then hopefully, you may be aware, I don't know, we push out a feedback after every board meeting. So every 3 months, a GA feedback will be produced. In fact, we're just about to produce one. We had the board meeting last week, so in the next couple of weeks I'll be producing the next GA feedback. And that's how we get the messages out. I don't know if you've seen them, they're online on the CHIRP website. We do try and send them a hard copy to as many clubs and traffic control units as we can. I don't know if they come here, to be honest. I didn't look at the list before I came, but hopefully they do. So there's a GA, there's an air transport, a cabin crew, and a drone feedback that go out once a month effectively. And there they are. So we've just spent a reasonable amount of time revamping our look from what was a pretty much 1960s look to something a bit more modern than with it. We have an app, as you can see on the far right hand side, so please do download that. You can submit reports on it easily. What we'd like to think it's easy. If it's not, then tell us. We have a nice website, chirp.co.uk, and we're now into social media as well. I'm the sort of wrong side of 40 to understand social media, but Jen, who's my cabin crew programmer, she's the right side of 40, and so she does the social media stuff for that, and we are embarking on that. I obviously understand it, but I have no real interest in it, so she's the one who does all that social media stuff. And we push out feedback using those systems. We also send out on the Skywise. I don't know if any of you are subscribing to the CAA Skywise system, so we push it out on that as well. And we also push it out to air transport and those GA folk who we know the email addresses for. They go out to circa 30,000 people, each one. Now whether they get read or not, you know, whether it just goes straight to the spam and in the junk, I don't know. But we do try to send that as far as we can. Limited because we don't have email addresses for everybody. There's no requirement to do that. When you in the past when you had the license issued, changing now because it's all electronic, so we'll get better maybe. That's where they go. But we sort of rely on the Skywise push so people to understand that's what we're doing. And if you want to get hold of us, then you can email at mail@chirp.co.uk, and we'll respond. We try and respond to everybody, even though we are a bit tight on resources to acknowledge. And I say you can submit reports on the web or the app, hopefully simply. That all sounds very good or very grand. What's the reality then? What are we really doing? So, as I said before, we are a safety valve, safety net. So, we're another route for reporting if the formal route isn't working for you. That's primarily for the commercial world. You know, sometimes things go into the MOR system and then they disappear into the black hole and nothing ever happens. So people come to us as CHIRP, well, I've done this report, nothing's happened, can you investigate? Well, we can try. And we are, the second bullet there is the reports that would not have been written, or would have gone unwritten previously. That's what CHIRP is trying to achieve. So send us the information. You know, the old I learned about flying from that stuff. All that stuff is good for us. It gives good messages, good information, good lessons for others. When we kind of lose that, I mean, I think in this sort of environment where you've got a crew room and you sit in your chat, that happens. But we're trying to reach to the farmer in the farmer's field with his own one aircraft who doesn't have that facility. You know, how can we get a message across to them? Whistleblowing, we do with that as well. So clearly, we're confidential, we disidentify. So if somebody doesn't feel they can whistleblow through the CIA system, we can act as a third party for them. We try not to do that if we can because it just gets a bit messy. You know, if the CIA whistleblowing system report us in the middle, there's always a bit of a communication issue, isn't there, when you've got a third party involved. So we try not to do that, but we can do that. And again, that mitigates against reports not being made. For GA, we are a bit of an agony aunt. I get a load of mea culpa type stuff from GA. I did this, it wasn't my finest hour, however, I want the world to know about it. And that is really, really healthy. Because that's people who feel they want the world to know that there's this little thing that happened and it could happen to you. And I've got a whole bunch of those. We don't publish them all because some of them are very, very identifiable. But that's quite an important part of our life. And also, people who maybe aren't in this sort of environment, a farmer in a farmer's field, who doesn't know where else they can go to. Where can I go to report something? Well, you can come to CHIRP and report it to us, or we'll show you where to go in the system to report it yourself. It's a bit of agony out. We champion causes and act as an advocate, yes. So as before, we're kind of the conscience, if you like, of the industry and the regulator, as best we can be. So we try and champion as much as we can do. Resources are tight. I stand up front and say that, we don't have the time to engage in every good cause, but we try and do what we can. And then finally, we're there about to try and promote that just culture thing. And good old back when I first started flying back in the 80s, nobody ever admitted to anything. In the military world, if you did that, then you get chopped. So you just kept things to yourself, and that's really bad. But it still persists a little bit. You see something happening, oh, pilot error. Well, really, pilot error? I mean, generally, if things happened, it's not always, or very very rarely, is it the pilot who's made an error purely from personal flying skill. It's a systemic error. So we're very much into pilot error or pilot saves. And how many every flight, the pilot saves a day because they do something to stop the aeroplane crashing. I'm being a bit dramatic there, but we do, don't we? So we need to remember that. So when people are looking at something that's happened, oh, this is obviously pilot error. We'll try and think behind that. Why did they do what they did? Why did they think that was the right thing to do at the time? That's what we're after. So that's where CHIRP comes from, our mandate. bit about threat and error management. I hope that you've all heard of threat and error management. It's the buzzword of the year, if you like. Three buzzwords, isn't it? Buzz phrase. And it's all about what could possibly go wrong. Clearly, the person in this bit of video may or may not have done. Think ahead. That's what threat and error management is. Oh. I've lost my screen now. I don't know why that happened. Pause a minute. I don't know what's going on there. What could go wrong? I think this video has blown up the. Just try that again.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go. Presentation. Just run it again.
Yeah, I'll just press the.
There you go. Up
and running. Stand by. Right. I don't know why that happened. Sorry about that. How do we think about threat and error management then? So you may or may not have been aware, in the safety world, the big thing, James Reason is one of the gurus of the safety world. Back in the 70s, proposed this idea of there being barriers you could put up to stop bad things happening. And they're called safety barriers. So a lot of the work we do is focused on that. And the idea being that there's bad things out there on the left-hand side, trying to crash the aircraft on the right-hand side. And these barriers are there, put up like training, regulations, currency, whatever, avoiding distractions to stop those threats from getting across and causing a problem in the aircraft. Of course, it only takes a bit of weakening of those barriers, and it's a visual sort of concept. The idea being, you weaken the barriers, the threats can get through. So that's what we're all about in the safety world, is how can we keep those barriers strong? And what are the barriers? And there's a lot of theory about this, and you can spend a week's worth of lectures on safety barriers. But the concept is to look at the situation and go, how can I stop this happening? Threat and error management. What is the threat? What is the consequence? And how can I avoid that threat from achieving that consequence? And that's the basic idea between safety barriers. The problem is, those barriers are weakened by the humans. We're all humans, obviously. We're all pilots and whatever. We're still people. So let's just talk about the standard human for a little bit. Human factors. Well, the first thing to note, there is no standard human. So we're all different. Isn't that obvious to say that? But it sounds so trite, doesn't it? But we are all different because there are all different things weighing on our lives, affecting us, stresses and whatever. So we have different skills. There are aces of the base. There are those who struggle a bit. There are very clever people. There are very mechanical people. There are fast athletes. There are whatever. Everybody's got a different range of capabilities. So we have to think about that when we're looking at safety. We are pretty rubbish at interfacing with our world. We're pretty good at living in trees, where we evolved. But in the aviation world, as we all know, we're very poorly adapted to it because we're not supposed to be in that world. And we've designed the world so we can do those things, but we have problems with it. We all know about acceleration, for example, whatever issues with somatic graphics, all that sort of stuff. So we're pretty poor at interfacing with our aviation world. Day to day, we can be ace of the base yesterday, rubbish today, because we have something's happened. We didn't sleep so well last night, or whatever. So we have to think about that as well when we're looking at human factors. We get saturated really, really easily. You just pile the pressure on, and eventually the brain goes, "That's it. I've had enough. I can't think anymore." And we've all done that. Maths in public. We've all done that sort of stuff where we just can't do it. Of course we can do long division, but if I did it now on the whiteboard, I go, "Oh, crikey, here we go." We just get saturated. Now the other side of that is we're prone to saturation, but we're also prone to being under aroused. So what do? Modern airliners, we make them all automatic, and we tell the pilots to sit there and just monitor what's going on. That's probably the worst thing you could do to a person. But that's what we do because it's a safer way overall. But we need the stimulus. So if we don't get the stimulus, we perform really badly. We get distracted easily, do we not? If we're a little bit, that's a bit tedious. This presentation's rubbish, isn't it? Well, I'm just going to get on my iPad and start doing a bit of whatever. We just get distracted. Just as human beings, our attention spans go all over the world. And we're sensitive to the environment. So, it's hot, cold, bit ill, bit under the weather, relationships, cultural biases. We're all, I'm looking around the room here, we're all white, Anglo-Saxon. There's not much cultural difference here, is there? So we have that sort of mindset as well to come more in the commercial world, but also in the GA world as well. And we are prone to making pretty rubbish errors in decision making and judgment. So the stuff piles on and we just react badly. And next slide, I think, mention a little bit more. So all that translates into, these are 6 things here. I'm going to just highlight, I think it's 6. The interface with the world. I'm sort of preaching to the choir, I'm sure. But in terms of the input-output for the human brain, you've got about 10 or 20 seconds worth of working memory. If you go beyond that, then it just falls out the other ear and you can't remember it. Visually is really bad. You can remember things, well, visually for about a second. And I'm just trying to think of an example. I can't really think of, you're driving along, look in the mirror, there's a car in the mirror. Off you go. Well, what colour was that car? Oh, I can't remember now. Oh yeah, it was red. Because you just don't have the capacity. The brain can't hold that information flow because it's megabytes of information every blooming millisecond. So it just dumps it. Audio, about 8 seconds worth of audio. And we all know that, when you get maxed out, overtasked, the first thing that goes is the hearing. You don't hear the instructor in the back bleating at you about speed or whatever because you're maxed out. And that's it, serial memory. So that's the problem we're trying to overcome. The attention span, I've mentioned that already, so I'll move on from that. Distractions as well. Fatigue, tiredness, and this is the worst time to be doing a presentation. You've just been out all day in the cold, rigging your gliders, doing this, whatever, and we bring you into a nice warm room with a pint of beer, and you're all going, what's going on? So, tiredness, fatigue, big issues. Perception, so this is quite interesting. So, how you see something depends on which end of the telescope you're looking through. I used to be the director of the Airprox board, and you get 2 people report the same incident, or talk about the same incident, with a completely different perception of what went on, because they're in a different, different bit of the sky, obviously, but also different experience, capacity, whatever. Your level of knowledge and familiarity will affect your perception of things. I mean, if you're, I don't know, the world's expert on pink flowers, and you see a pink flower, you'll have a different perception from somebody who's just got no knowledge or interest in flowers at all. They'll just see a pink flower. You'll see a pink flower with 59 stamens and whatever, and you'll perceive more because of your knowledge. Expectations, same thing. Previous experience, because if you're aware of an environment, you'll perceive more. And again, processing capacity. We've all been students, haven't we? Where you are working like a one-arm paper hanger, and you just don't see things. You don't perceive things because you're really processing information. So just think about that, how you perceive things. When somebody says, oh, this thing happened, no, it wasn't, it was this. This modern thing. Your truth is different to somebody else's truth. There is only one truth, but your perception of that truth is different. So you've got to be careful about that as well. I mentioned decision making. So this is the sort of generally recognised 3 ways of making decisions. Skill based. So, for example, take driving a car. You've been driving for a few years. You're pretty skilled at driving a car. So you'll do things without even thinking about it. You'll overtake. You'll be looking, indicating, whatever. You won't be thinking about that because your skill base is high. but it's all instinctive, and it may be incorrect. You may have not got all the information to make that decision. Rule-based, well, same thing, driving a car. When you first drove a car, it was all very, you know, mirror, signal, manoeuvre. Mirror, signal, manoeuvre. It wasn't manoeuvre, signal, oh, got that wrong. You know, so rule-based is quite important, but you have to keep that being refreshed. So I was really interested in your simulator. That's really good way of making people refreshed on rules and procedures and things like, for you, you know, winch launch failures. We'll go and there's some practicing, because that just gets you thinking about the whole thing. So that's rule-based. And then knowledge-based, expectation bias. Yes, again, so say you're an experienced car driver, and then you get into an articulated lorry for the first time. You'll have a different expectation of what's going on, what's going to happen, and it won't fit the situation. So you'll make errors in decisions. So those are the three sort of ways we make decisions. All three of them have flaws. And then finally, the stresses on the whole thing. And I mentioned those. So professional is pretty obvious. You know, task-related, peer pressure. If you're a nice, you know, bright day out there and you're sat on the end of the winch launch, everybody's looking, bit of pressure, going to get this right. You know, so that's the stress levels. The environment is pretty obvious. You know, heat, noise, vibration. It affects us, stresses us. But then domestic, and so this has been really important in the last few years. COVID and that sort of thing, a lot of stress from that. I mean, people don't think about that. But there are people out there, I mean, they might have had close family friends die from COVID. You know, so there's stresses in there which may not be evident. And you may need to be a bit more empathetic to what's going on in people's lives, or what the stress they might be on before you judge them, if you like. Right, I'm going to move a bit more quickly now. I think how do we do all that? CHIRP, what do we do in terms of assessing before we get a report come in? We do all that stuff. We use a couple of taxonomies to look at how we, I would say, grade reports. Not quite grading, but it's looking at the background reports. We use a dirty dozen, some people a deadly dozen, to maybe look at a report and go, well, which of these do we think were the main things in the report? I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's been around for quite a while, but it's a good way of thinking about things. Here are the 12, let's say most important things, but 12 important things you need to think about when you're embarking on a event, if you can. I'm not going to go through them all, but suffice to say there are 12 things there, which feel free to use if you wish. In terms of more systematically, we use a thing called the Shell model, which was invented by a guy called Cliff Edwards in the 70s. Funny enough, he worked for Shell. So guess why it's called the Shell model? But it makes sense. So, software, hardware, environment. This bit's a bit contrived, liveware and liveware. The humans in the process. So we use that to analyse, and I'm going to build these pretty quickly. So software, and I don't mean software in terms of machine code software. All that soft stuff, all your regulations, your procedures, your order books and whatever, that's all software. Hardware is kind of what it says. Environment is again, not just the weather or whatever, but it's the environment, the club environment. Sometimes you go to places where it's pretty toxic actually, and you go, crikey. And that can have a factor on the whole way you operate. And then liveware, how you communicate with each other. And of course, you're the person in the middle. All those things are going on all at the same time, so we have to take that into account as well. But we use that model, and there's a taxonomy which goes with it, which I'm hoping is the next slide. So it is, there we go, called ADREP, which is an ICAO taxonomy, which we then, it's a whole list of things which could apply to a certain situation. And we code them in these series to come up with what it might be. So these are randomly selected, so it could be company procedures, shift work, rosters, whatever. And we code them in for each report, which then gives me the information that I can then draw out to use, which I'm going to show you in a minute, some stats about what's been going on. It's all very well to look at reports, well that's very interesting, and we'll address the report as a concern, but how does that help you? It doesn't really. The strength in this system is the aggregated knowledge of all those reports together, and that's what I'm going to give you, I think, in the next few slides. After this one. So this is all about the unknown unknowns. Now this is a bit dated, we'll see there 1990. But some clever whiz Australia looked at reporting, and it's a fact that about 80% or so of accidents, and probably more actually, have got a human factors aspect to them, generally considered. But only about, I would say it's more than that now, because this is 1990. I think you could say 10% or whatever of commercial reporting overtly talks about human factors. And only about, I'll probably say 15-20% of the GA accidents overtly talk about human factors. So there's a mismatch. Why is that? And this is what this is the meat of the whole thing really. 4 real things. So why don't people report? Because they fear punitive action. Now that's probably not going to happen in the club environment, but in the commercial world it might. Second one, there could be very much in a club environment. You fear the ridicule from your peers. Well, I'm not going to say anything about that because they'll laugh at me in the bar. I reported last year this thing. Bloody hell, nothing ever happened. All I did was get in trouble from the CFI. And this report, and I did it, and it was just a bit of red tape, so I'm not doing that again. Those are the 4 main reasons why people don't report. So that's why it's important that clubs overcome that sort of atmosphere and try and encourage reporting. Now I mentioned that just culture thing, didn't I? Way back a little bit. And so we like to classify things in terms of pigeonholing, so we do that. The first two, well the first one is what I call just culture vertically. So punitive action, this is, I am happy to report things, I don't care if the CFI knows about it, because I know he's not going to come down and say, you idiot. He's going to say, well, that's really interesting, how can we have made this better? The second bullet, just culture horizontally, that's about all us, isn't it? When somebody comes and says, oh, I did this really stupid thing. Bloody hell, yeah, well, I nearly did that as well. Rather than going, you idiot. So that's just culture horizontally. Never a positive response. That comes with the safety system, safety officer, making sure that we pull the juice out of the reports and that something is seen to be done with it. And then reports as red tape. That's having the effective and simple reporting system, which CHIRP hopefully provides you with for confidential reporting. Within that comes report maturity. Now these 2 bullets are the important 2 bullets really. Nobody comes to work intending to fail. Well, I say that. Very few people come to work intending to fail. Now, there have been occasions where people have come to work intending to do bad things. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but generally, you come to work or you come to the club and you want to do good stuff. But we all make mistakes, and that's why I went through that human factors stuff. It's going to happen. You're not going to stop it. It will happen. It's just, that's why there's barriers. So we make the mistakes, but we put the barriers in place so that mistake doesn't get to the point where it's going to cause an incident. And we have what we call maturity of reporting. There are 3 levels. The military call it the age of reporting, so I'm not sure why anyway. So the level 1 reporting is, this thing happened, I did this. Interesting and important, but doesn't give you much insight in terms of what's been going on. And we call that a transactional report. So I don't know, winch launch, cable broke, I landed. Very good. Doesn't tell you much other than the winch, the cable broke, and you landed. Second level is the same thing really, but something else did. So somebody did this, and I did this to resolve it. Again, interesting but transactional. No real insight into the whole thing. So what we are really trying to achieve, this is the 3rd level of reporting, is focusing on the issues. And as it says there, I did this thing, but you wouldn't have known about it unless I told you. That is the gold dust of reporting. That's what we're after. So when you make a report, it's not about what happened. Well, it is obviously about what happened, but it's what were you doing? What were you thinking? Why did you think it was right to do what you did? And all that good stuff behind it. So that's what I would encourage whenever you're going to make a report, even a mandated report. Just go behind that and start saying, yeah, this thing went wrong, and either I did this thing which was good or bad or whatever. And that's the honesty of reporting. For CHIRP, what do you report? It's all about things that go on with people. That's what we're after. What do you not report? We're only after safety. Okay, so we don't do personality clashes and all that sort of stuff, industrial relations, terms of service. That's not what CHIRP's for. It's purely safety stuff involving people. Here's the sort of stuff you report, or when you should report, should I say. And the sort of things which we're after are those little errors and mistakes or whatever, and performance affecting safety, ultimately. So that's the advert, but that's the guidance for reporters to chirp, and reporters generally, actually, in mandatory exams. Right, so I promised to get down to the stats. Here we go. How am I doing for time? 10 minutes to go. So here's what Chirp saw in the last couple of years, well, since 2019. Number of reports. So we generally were getting about, I don't know, 60 to 80 reports a month coming to Chirp. Quite a lot. There's only a few of us staff to deal with those, but quite a lot. And then clearly what happened, I came in, so reporting to that. Not my fault really, I'd like to think anyway. But that was COVID, you see April 2020, bang, aviation stopped, didn't it, pretty much. So clearly they're reporting. And you can sort of look interesting enough, those are when we had the lockdowns. You can see how they affected the reporting. But the good thing is we're getting back up towards historical levels. Not quite there yet. Hence this is why I'm doing this sort of thing. Get the message out there, get the reporting going, start feeding back to us, and me to feed back to you. So we're about the 50 to 60 level of reports, as opposed to the 60 to 80. So we're about 70% at the moment. Now, given this is a quiet time of the year for GA, I'm not worried about that. It will pick up. I was a bit confused back in August, September, October. We took a dip in reporting. It was a brilliant summer, lots of flying going on. I'm sure that everybody went flying, nobody didn't make any mistakes. So I'm a bit troubled that reporting dipped last summer. Now maybe people were doing so much flying they didn't have time to report or didn't want to report, I don't know.
It's not in the summer, is it? It's in the autumn.
Well, yes, so you're right. So June, July, August were quite high, but then September, October, November dipped down. So it was still quite good weather. October and November weren't so good, but September it was going downwards. Now it always does go down in the winter for us. And this is all, don't forget, this is also commercial as well, not just GA. This is also commercial. And that's another fact. I won't go into that now. But the commercial side, I mean, the commercial were going completely mad, trying to fly as much as they could do. Get back, and again, reporting went down. And then there is actually a school of thought with commercial pilots telling me that they just didn't have time to report. They were just doing so many sectors, coming back at the end of the day, absolutely bushed. And the last thing you want to do is go, oh yeah, I'll do a chirp. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's part of that, I think. That's the input level. That's interesting. What came out of 2022? So a couple of charts here, just to show. I mean, these are good old Excel. You can do anything with Excel, can't you? These are the issues that were reported to CHIRP in terms of percentage reports over 2022. And it's clear to see that the main focus are handling of the aircraft, following procedures, individual errors, and then defences. These are the barriers, is what I'm talking about there. Other stuff going on down there, I won't go into in depth because I've got another couple of slides which go into more depth. That's the flavour. Now, just every report we codify in our taxonomy, it can have more than one issue. So that's why 83 entries from only about last year. I can't remember now. There must be about 50 or 60 reports. I can't remember now. So there are some double issues going on there. But that's the flavour of what we saw. So that's what I am more concerned about. That's what I'll talk about in a minute when I get there. Another way of looking at it is that. So those are the same things. Now you can see that the handling and procedures have sort of swapped over. That's a database issue for us. And not all key issues have a sub-breakdown, detailed breakdown. Don't worry about that. They are pretty much the same. Don't worry about the eye test either, because I'm going to get over that in a minute. All those key issues we then sub-codify into stuff that goes on to do with that. Now, I said it wouldn't be an eye test. So, it still is an eye test. Procedures. So, use of by a reporter, procedures. Use of by another party, inadequate procedures, knowledge of procedures, incorrect, blah, blah, blah. Handling operation, airmanship. Well, what's that airmanship thing? I don't know. We can just define that for a start. That'd be a good start of 10. Operation of equipment, handling by the crew. So we go into this sort of sub-classification, and just I think the bottom bit, situational awareness in the air on the ground, defences, I talked about that, communications and individual error. So we go into that level of depth just to work out what we think are the issues, and that then leads me into my final slide, I think it is. We're getting there anyway. The top issues for CHIRP. So the top one then, and this is the stuff to think about. Failure to follow procedures. And this is a little bit of complacency. Oh, it'll be all right. It doesn't matter that we've got one wheel hanging off. Whatever. We'll be okay. In the GA world, we had a couple of reports in GA world. For those of you who are powered pilots, magnetos. People getting airborne with less thrust than they should, going, oh, I'll be all right, and then I'll sort it out in the air. And then they find out they haven't turned the magnetos to both. So complacency. It'll be okay, won't it? No, it won't. Application procedures, knowledge of procedures, and understanding procedures. So that's the top level of incident and event that we've seen in the GA world. And that applies to all of you. Procedures, refreshing yourself. We've probably gone through that a little bit now, but we are about to embark on the next year's flying. So get your head in the books, understand what's going on, use your simulator, and get used to those procedures and refresh those procedures so that you aren't being complacent and you do understand them. Handling the aircraft, a lot of recency and familiarity. So 2020, we would have expected that because they didn't start flying again until the summertime really, after a long COVID layoff. But recency, and I don't know if you use this, the BGA barometer, really quite interesting actually. I mean, I've never used it in anger, but it gives you an idea, something to think about. Where am I on that barometer? Personally, you've got to think about this personally. Now, clearly, the rest of the CFI and whatever instructors are going to look at it as well. In the GA world, and this thing called the Farley card, which is the personal currency thing, where how many winch launches did I do in the last month or whatever, I don't know. So handling an operation is all about recency, really. Situational awareness and management, we've talked about that. Weight and balance. In the GA world, quite an issue. People don't understand weight and balance really, or have forgotten about weight and balance. And I go back to my gliding time. How many times did I put the kit on with the parachute and then weigh myself? Once in the blue moon. But so religiously went in the cockpit and flew. Well, I didn't really know how much I weighed and whether I was in the COQ. Kind of probably was. But you should be doing that, shouldn't we? Well, I don't know if we do. Is that do you have a set of scales at the launch point? Do you put all the kit on? Do you weigh yourself? Well, yeah, I need a bit of weight in the front for those lighter than me. So things to think about. Icing arms, I probably don't really apply to you. Well, they don't apply to you. Pressinitis. Yeah. We're going to get on with it. We'll do it. We'll be okay. Don't worry. We'll just launch. So I know it's 100-foot cloud base, but we'll be okay. Defences, I mentioned those defences. It's that TEM thing, really. Threat and area management and eventualities. Now, eventualities briefs at the end of the runway. Sorry, launch point. So do them. Be religious about them. Before you get airborne, that situation, eventualities brief. What could go wrong? Might be the brightest, bluest, sunniest day with a lovely bit of wind, but something could go wrong. Think about it. And if that cable breaks at 200 feet, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? I'm preaching to the converted. You'll all be doing that, but it's that sort of attitude. That's what threat and error management is all about. Threats being the external things, the cable breaking, whatever. Errors being what could I do wrong? Well, I could over-rotate on the launch and start shooting for the moon rather than going up at 45 degrees. Or something like that. Communication. Yeah, so clarity of written and spoken communication. The instructors amongst you will know, it's really difficult in a tandem cockpit to communicate sometimes. 80% of our communication is done through our eyes. 20% is through the mouth and through the ears. So you're automatically putting yourself into that lower fifth of communication capability by sitting in a tandem cockpit. So it's thinking about that. It's thinking about orders. Are the orders written clearly and specifically? Do people understand them? All that sort of stuff applies to gliding world as well as to the GA world. Assumptions. Yeah, he'll have checked that. He'll have checked the rigging, won't he? I don't need to be doing the control checks. The guy that flew it previously will have done those. Obviously it worked, so I'll be all right. Yes, probably right. still do the control checks, still make sure it's all working. In curious pilots, not asking the question, are we sure? Yeah, we've always done it this way. Why have we done that then? Because it's often those questions you go, well, I don't know, why are we doing it that way? So it's things to think about in that respect as well. Organisational stuff, again, not so much of a factor in terms of this sort of club environment. But I talked about toxic cultures. Sometimes you go to places where there's a higher strata of the very experienced folk, been there, done it, unapproachable. New people into the environment, crikey, the experienced people are there. Bit of a, I would say cross-cockpit gradient, but it's not, that's for the commercial world, but a hierarchical gradient, so they won't challenge the folk at the top because they're really experienced. There's no such thing as a stupid question, is there? So let those people make stupid questions as you think are stupid, because you might just learn something yourself. Personal relationships, we all have our favourites, don't we? People we like, people we don't like, but just try not to let that colour the safety world, if you can help it. And those self-induced and external pressures, I kind of mentioned those. Change management, and I put this in because even in this club world, COVID will have an effect. Things will have changed, procedures will probably have changed. We're probably getting back into the old way of doing things a little bit more, but things will have changed. And it's how are those changes managed? How are the safety officers, the CFIs, whatever, how have they introduced those changes? Do people understand them? Do they buy into them? Are they going to do these things? Or is it just a bit of an edict from on high? Have you involved everybody in the change that you're just about to make or you have made in the past? What are you thinking about? No TAM, so I'm not going to go into this in depth because it's a very emotive subject. We all know the no-TAM system is rubbish. We all know that it's torturous to find out what you need to know. There are reasons for it being the way it is. It's an international system. It's not just a UK system. The CA, God bless them, like to do more, try and do their best. They're hidebound. There is a review internationally of the no-TAM system, but it's not going to happen in months. It's going to be years. You've got to work within it. But you've got to check those no-TAMs. There's quite a lot going on there where no-TAMs aren't checked properly. You're quite fortunate here, there's not a lot of airspace around, but there will be no-TAMs around. So do check them. I've put a picture of Skydemon there. I don't know if you've probably seen Skydemon and used it. But for example, do you have a Skydemon on a system, an iPad or whatever, at the launch point? One last check, there's no no-TAMs. We're okay. Do you do that? I don't know, maybe you do. Maybe it's probably a bit over the top, I don't know. Just being aware of no-TAMs and the airspace around you. And I think that's probably so it kind of leads into the second slide. Infringements are increasing in UK airspace, which is counterintuitive because more people are flying with electronic navigation aids, but we're doing more infringements. So I'm not sure everybody knows really why that's the case. There's a couple of theories. People are shaving past airspace now, but not quite cracking it. We should be more aware of airspace than we are. Again, you're pretty lucky here. There's not a lot of airspace that you're going to bump into. Well, obviously, I know you can go further distances than I've shown on the map there. But just being aware of them and making risk assessments, communication. AICs, no-TAMs, all those airspace changes. Are you aware? Who's looking at that? Who's monitoring all that? Who's publicising? Or they've just changed the airspace around Shawbury, whatever. Who's doing that bit of work? So that's the summary, really. Human factors. All I've talked about is getting that intelligence about precursors. Confidential reporting is us. We're user-friendly. We're friendly people. I am very friendly. We're well connected as part of the UK safety team. And our key principles are those in orange. You can be safe reporting to us. Your name is not going to get out to anybody. So if you do report, be confident that that is the case. We haven't had anybody, to touch wood, since 1982. Nobody has been identified in a CHIRP report. So that's pretty good. I think that's pretty. Here we go. One last. What could possibly go wrong? here we go. So somebody's rolled their tractor. Things happen, I suppose, don't they? So they're trying to recover the situation. I'll talk as this is playing. So you could say, well, that's not a very safe way of doing it, is it? These strops could break. No safety helmet on this guy or this guy. Perhaps the digger might tip. This guy's getting out of there, he's not interested. What could possibly go wrong? No. Stop it. So what have we done so far? Well, that's okay, then it's all worked out pretty well. Always good. Except we forgot to put the handbrake on.
I
So
don't think that would be
what could possibly go wrong? That's I would leave you with that sort of that thought. I'm happy to. Well, I've overrun. I'm sorry about that. I must cut down the presentation or stop talking so much. Happy to take questions as much as you like, or none. If you don't want to give questions, then that's also equally fine. It's, leave to the floor. Go ahead.
In your initial pyramid,
Yes.
you mentioned there were about 30,000 reports going into the CAA part of that pyramid.
Yeah.
If at the same reporting rate you'd be facing 600,000, you can't possibly cope with that.
Oh, no, you're
how,
right.
How do you
Yes.
how do you set a have you any sort of threshold that of seriousness that will prevent you?
Yeah. I mean, it's
Trivial.
be careful what I wish for, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Because I could get overloaded pretty easily. Yep, so I say it's me and me alone really that's doing the reporting. I work 4 days a week and I'm already pretty maxed out. Now we have a sister organisation. I mentioned I didn't mention. There was a slide there about the International Confederation of Aviation Safety Systems, which we are part of. And we have an American sister organisation called ASRS. They get 80,000 reports a year. And the way they've done it is they say, well, there's no possible way we can deal with those. We will have an automated system. So they will automatically respond. I mean, they do review a sort of first pass. This is the important one of the system. I think we probably have to go down the same route because the CIA aren't going to give me any more money. So we have to accept that. We would do our best to deal with what we can. I say, even if we doubled what we get, that would be difficult enough. So yes, I mean, I suppose I should temper that, shouldn't I, by saying, do report to us, but do acknowledge that we, as I already mentioned, it's not a quick response piece anyway. It's not a send report. I get back to you tomorrow. There will be a delay.
I guess the underlying question is, do you have examples of the sort of things you want to receive reports about and those that you don't, so that we can be as...
I don't know that there is really. What I would say is, if you have, if there are reports, in fact we always say to everybody, the first protocol is to go through your system. So report to your safety officer. And what I would probably recommend would be for the safety officer then to look at the reports and go, well, this is quite useful and this could be publicised. If you're happy with that, and obviously there's an identification thing. Now, if you haven't reported to the safety officer and you want to come to CHIRP anyway, then that's fine. We can do that. We're after the key findings. I mentioned the magneto thing. So we had 2 reports in quick succession of people not turning magnetos to both. Now, individually, you go, well, that's kind of interesting, but not that interesting. But you get 2 of them, and suddenly it becomes, oh, that's actually a trend. Well, that's almost a trend of, not quite a trend of 2 things. But it suddenly becomes an interesting thing to start. Oh, actually, folks out there, this thing's happening. I don't know what the threshold would be. I wouldn't want to say, particularly, don't report this sort of stuff. I mean, I suppose if it's a minor thing that isn't going to be relevant to anybody else other than a small thing that happened, then I suppose you can argue that wouldn't be worth reporting to us. But you're right. It's a tricky one. I don't want to sound like I'm being
You're looking
negative.
for things that where you bring them together, stuff that's happened at this club and other clubs where we wouldn't necessarily know about it.
Yes,
Starts to
now,
become useful.
the reason I'm sort of saying go through your safety officer to certain things, and I'm hoping you do that, a safety officer and a system to report them. What I would hope is that, because the best way of doing that is to then go to them, they then go to the BGA, if I presume you're affiliated to the BGA, I don't know. And the BGA will then go, well, we've had 55 reports of this, and they will then do the publicity. Well, sort of the reporting of last resort, really. The system is there, designed to receive those 30,000 reports. We're not set up for that, and if we did have that sort of process, we get swamped. So I suppose what I'm saying is use your process, use the safety officers, do that. If you can't get any traction as a person, you think, well, I've done all that, and I still think it's an important thing, then that's the time to come to us. Yeah.
More of a comment at the very beginning, you said you don't get much in the gliding.
No, I don't. No.
But that's probably because of the culture that we have in the gliding community, certainly in this club, is that we would report to the club safety officer and we would send a copy of that to the BGA. We wouldn't, I wouldn't even think of CHIRP. I would send it to the club and send it to the BGA, and we get an analysis from the BGA annually.
And that's absolutely, that is the way it should be. CHIRP is a reporting system of last resort, if you like. As I mentioned, if you're not getting any traction through that process and you still think there's stuff going on, or you don't feel you can talk to your safety officer, then that's when to come to CHIRP. Now I've been in clubs and organisations where when they're almost at each other's throats. That's quite distressing sometimes, because clubs like this exist because you're clubs and you're all friends and mates and whatever, and you're all willing to learn from each other. Not the case in all clubs. There are places out there where literally the club ethos is broken. Really.
One of the comments you made in there was that the lack of reporting, or one of the reasons for the lack of reporting, was fear of punitive action, which I think is what we're talking about. You also said, to use a fairly horrible term, that you disidentify those people that report. Now that implies that you were going to get a fairly unpleasant reaction if that report went straight to the authority or management to whom you would eventually report.
Yeah.
Rather than building a filter between those two bodies, would we not be better lobbying those authorities to have a rather more open approach to this?
Yes, I mean, so I didn't labour it, but the CAA do have a whistleblowing process, which is completely confidential. Well, I say that. It's intended to be confidential, but they do have a caveat that they say if we're going to action this with an organisation, then it may be you become identified by virtue of the fact we've done that. We have an absolute confidentiality thing, and that's why we say to the reporter.
Well, surely the culture should be that it doesn't matter if you're identified.
Exactly. Absolutely. In an
There should
ideal
be no
world,
necessity for
in an ideal world, there would be no need for CHIRP. Because everybody would be completely just culture.
Yeah.
You'd be able to stand up and go, "Oh, this happened," or whatever, without fear or favour. That isn't the world we live in. That's why CHIRP exists, because we have to have something to pick up on that safety net piece. And that's why I say,
It's a
go
sad
through the
indictment
system.
of the sort of authorities with which we work.
Well, it's human nature, isn't it? Really, it's a human thing, I suppose. There always will be personality clashes or whatever. Yes, I mean you're right. In the ideal world.
One of the last things on your list there about things that have been going wrong was airspace infringements.
Yeah.
And there was, I think the BGA picked up on the fact that there were quite a few glider infringements last year. Do you not have a legal obligation to let the authorities know if you know that somebody busted, for example, Class A airspace?
Yeah, so I don't get too involved in airspace infringements in that respect. That goes
if
through.
somebody reported through CHIRP that they knew very well they're flown through a big piece of Class A airspace or something, and they wanted to make people aware of why that happened in order to learn from the experience. I would have thought you had a legal obligation. You've got the name of the guy who's fessing up to busting Class A airspace.
It's just culture, don't blame
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
the law, I think the law requires that you have to dob people in that circumstance.
Yeah.
I don't you know, it's never happened. So that's why I'm
Because you'd be protecting
thinking on my
somebody who's
feet.
admitting to breaking the law.
Well, but
Busting it.
that's part of the. So what would be the? What's the intended consequence? Do we want to punish them, or do we want to learn?
No, the fact
about
is
why
they've
it
said
happened?
I've broken the law.
Yeah, exactly.
You know that they've broken the law, you've got
Well,
their name.
okay.
Therefore, you should tell
Right,
them
so-
the CAA.
Have you ever broken the speed limit?
I may have done some.
So shall I phone up the police now and say we've got a bunch of people here who've broken the speed limit? Shall I do that? Or I mean, so I know where you're coming from. I would not. I would probably tell the CAA that there had been an incident, but I don't know that I would tell them. And it was 10:15 on the 18th of February. So and so flew through airspace.
Surely it's better to get a report under the seal of the confessional than it is.
No, I'm not wondering about that. I'm wondering about the obligation of the church people to have to do it as part of, not even civic duty, legal duty, I suspect. But if you know somebody in a semi-official capacity, or at least a capacity like yours,
Well,
I don't know.
I don't. I'm being very vague deliberately because I don't know. I haven't thought about it and it's never happened. I'd have to think carefully about that, I must admit. I don't think I have a legal responsibility. I don't know.
Okay.
I would doubt it, not least because of the way your organisation is set up and its objectives, etc., is almost the reverse. And for saying unless it's very rare to have a sort of a strict reporting obligation.
Surely it's the responsibility of the people that perpetrated it.
And the event.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if somebody's reporting one to me and said, like, I flew through whatever Luton's airspace, I would go, well, you really ought to report that. You know, and they would say, okay, okay, I'll do it. And I say, don't worry, say, as long as you've been upfront, whatever, I will give them the spiel, I'm sure. But if they then said, no, I'm not going to do that because I fear for my licence, I go, okay, well, are you happy for me to go to the CIA and just give a general, here's what happened, without naming you? That's how I probably would do it.
I'm just really pleased to have you with us today. I mean, my awareness of CHIRP is entirely through my power flying, not through gliding. So it's great that you're here. I don't think we're on the list of places that receive written publications for that.
Yeah, well, there's something which is, I've got to review that anyway.
CHIRP ones or?
Yeah,
Anyway,
CHIRP is,
we will check that it is. We are.
Oh, it does. It comes onto the table, onto the club tables.
Okay, that's good.
Fairly regularly.
That's good. Well, I'm pleased about that because I inherited the list 3 years ago, and I've not had time to even review it. So it's in my head, which we've got to do,
Double check it, make sure we are.
to review the CAA known list of clubs, BJ known list of clubs, versus what we think we know. I'm sure they'll be very different.
And we're trying to get better as a club in incident reporting, or at least capturing data on the bottom layer of the pyramid, the sort of the everyday things that nearly happened that aren't.
Well, you are well placed to do that, with being the sort of club you are, with a club room and a in a bar, where you can informally go, this thing happened, pass the messages on, definitely.
Things above the process works reasonably well. Probably the most the kind of thing that I read about in CHIRP over the years is overflying gliding site here, which is regularly reported into the CA in a sort of separate.
But in my previous role as UCAP director, and actually with Pete Stratton, BJ, we had a big campaign about powered aviators avoiding gliding sites. It's not an infringement; it's airspace, but it's one of those common sense things, isn't it? You'd think, but powered aviators, unless they've got some gliding experience, I don't think really understand what's going on. To be honest,
we're beginning to work on some ways of communicating that more widely.
We can chirp.
Did you say you're funded by the CIA?
yes, I did, yes.
And so how often do you talk to each other, or every month, or is it?
I talk to on the flight operations up to the commercial side once a month. We feed them stats. We don't feed them reports.
Yeah.
So they'll get the sort of stats I've just shown you. So we've had 25 GA reports in summer, whatever. Here are the issues. So that's the sort of level of reporting. GA side less than commercial side because there's far more commercial. So when we had something like 660 reports last year, I think it was, of which I would say 600 were commercial and 60 were private. So that's the weight of effort in that respect. But I do talk into the. I mean, we had a board meeting, a GA board meeting last week. It's a bad example because the CAA rep couldn't come, but the CAA rep comes to those. A guy called Chris Mason. I don't know if you know. He's recently been moved up the tree in the GA unit at CAA. So he comes and he listens to what we talk about and he contributes to the CAA view. So that's every 3 months at least.
But if they have their own reporting system, then it seems to me that, well, it seems odd that they wouldn't take, you know, they have a separate reporting system for themselves.
Well, the problem is they're tied into a thing called ECARES, which I don't know if you may not have heard of, but that's the European reporting system. It is a nightmare. It really is. It's so non-user friendly, but because that's the way it is, they set up their databases, then that's the system that's in use. Even for commercial folk, well, if it's a safety management organisation, then they're au fait with MORs and whatever. But as a private pilot, if you went onto the ECARES reporting website, you'd probably give up after about a minute because it's just.
I think I understand. I find CAA stuff so.
Well, given their due, it's not the CAA's fault. They have to use a system which has been mandated. I keep saying to them, you need a simpler system. You need an app. That, you know, your average GA, whatever, can just go on the app as ours is and go right, ding, 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 ding. This is what happened. Unfortunately, that they are wedded into the database of ECARES, and there's good reasons for that because it's an internationally recognised system and all that good stuff. And to divorce themselves from that would be probably more. They'll probably tilt the whole CAA. I mean, they're working hard enough as it is with changing over from the ARSA to being a UK regulator again. And there's a new ECARES system called ECARES 2 coming out, which they're trying to bring in. It will probably be a complete disaster. So that's why. Well, there was before I came to CHIRP, there was a move for us to go to ECARES, and I said, we're not doing that. That is absolutely, it's just a complete resource hole for us. So we have our own little system, our own database. You could argue that databases that have hard walls around them are not that useful for everybody else. But the reason we have those hard walls around us is nobody else can get in there and find the information. It's a good reason for that, really.
Thank you.
I'm probably keeping you from your lunch or your dinner, aren't I?
You from you.
All I'm doing is driving home.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. That was brilliant. Very, very interesting. And we could show our appreciation, usual way.
Now I have a feel for how long it's going to take. I might cut a few slides out.
Just to remind everybody, we've got